Hello, how are you doing? Can you all see me and hear me? Okay, thank you. I'm just going to now try and see if I can get my PowerPoint up. I'm going to just make sure that that will work. Let's do my share screen. I need to have this and this. This is the presentation. Let's share it. Okay, and because I'm not the controller of this Pat, I can't see my viewers, so I just will have to, because I'm not the controller of this screen, I shared the screen. Sorry, let me just let her know. I'm talking to a person who's making sure I'm doing things correctly. Hang on a second.
So we cannot hear you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay now? Can you hear me okay? Great.
Yeah. Yes, yes.
Okay. Sorry, it took quite a bit. I had to have some IT people help me get it together because it was a little bit difficult. Okay, so my name is Sharon Cooper, and I'm really happy to be talking with you all this morning about helping hurting children. And I'm going to be using some slides in a moment. But first, let me just know who's here. And you can mute yourself if you want to. You don't have to. But if you would be so kind as to just raise your hand, I can see Miss Johnson, right there. Yeah, Miss Bryan, Miss McLean.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Brian.
Miss, there's Orlando and Patricia. There's good. Sheena Parker and Natalie Sandifer, right? Orlando and Patricia. Sorry, I couldn't see the end of your names. Sorry. Okay. And Miss McLean, etc. Right. Okay. So we have plenty of good. Thank you so much for being present today. So I am a developmental and a forensic pediatrician, which means that I see a lot of children who have developmental problems, ADHD, developmental delay, autism, etc. And also I see children who have been victims of crime, especially child maltreatment. And many of the children that come to our Sunday school classes are children who have had some significant life experiences. And I want to talk a little bit about those experiences and how we can work with them best. But let's start out with a prayer. If you could bow your heads. Oh God, we pray to be understood. Clarify our language, crystallize our intent. Help us choose words that will best reach your people and move them to action. Open the ears of our family, our loved ones, all in our circle of concern, and let them not just hear us, but comprehend. Amen. All right, so let's jump right in because I want to make sure that we can see everything we're going to be talking about. And I hope that you can see the slides that I have for you. If you can, certainly feel free to in the chat box say, yes, that is. I'm going to assume that you can see it. So first of all, when we are working with children who are hurting, many times we don't know that they're hurting. They just come to our Sunday school classes. We may have in our churches, we may know that there's been a bereavement, a loss of a loved one. We may know that there have been some type of move because a family has moved back to their home church because something else has happened in their lives that has caused them to come back. We may know that there's been someone who's been ill in a family and it has profoundly affected. Oh, there's more people in the waiting room, admit all, that have been profoundly affected with respect to the their life circumstances. But I want to talk now more generically about what we do see with respect to children who are hurting. Let me see if I can't. Okay. The book of Mark, the 10th chapter, 13 through 16, is one of the scriptures that are relevant to us always. And let me just get that out of the way. I apologize. People keep coming in, so I'm trying to stop to let them in. The Mark says, and they were bringing children to him that he might touch them, and the disciples rebuked them. But when Jesus saw it, he was indignant and said to them, let the children come to me. Do not hinder them, for to such belongs the kingdom of God. Truly I say to you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child shall not enter it. And he took them in his arms and blessed them with the laying on of his hands on them. So I want us to think about how we as Sunday school teachers have the ability, the right, and we also have the privilege of laying on of our hands, not necessarily physically laying on hands on these children, but emotionally laying on hands, protecting them in the sacred space of our Sunday school classes so that there's no judgment, there's no derogative statements, there's no criticism of children, because this may be one of the safest places that they can come. And it is the part that heals their soul. And this is a privilege for us. So we must really pay attention to it. So first of all, how do children become hurt? Research has helped us a lot. There are three big bodies of research that talk about hurting children: the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, the Adverse Community Experiences Study, and the Adverse Environmental Experiences. And let me go through those very quickly for you. These are three realms of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. Let me see, Miss Campbell is calling me, but I'm not going to answer that. The first area of adverse childhood experiences has to do with what happens in the household. The tree that you can see on this image where, well, let me just make sure that you all can see me, because, excuse me 1 second. Oh, okay. Incarcerated family members, physical and emotional abuse or neglect, bullying, maternal depression, domestic violence, emotional and sexual abuse, alcoholism, parental mental illness, homelessness, and divorce. These are all studied dynamics that cause people to be able to recognize that this is hurtful to children. That's the first type of adverse childhood experiences, these family circumstances. The second type, if you can see in the roots of the tree, are in the community, where discrimination, substandard schools, historical trauma, violence, poor water and air quality, lack of jobs, food scarcity, poor housing capability or affordability. And the third area of adverse childhood experiences has to do with the environment. And the most important one that I want you to see is pandemic, because I'm going to talk about that. The original adverse childhood experiences study entailed a pyramid, starting, if you would look at the term on the third tier of this pyramid, adverse childhood experiences. I'll tell you what they are in just a moment. But what we know is that when children have adversities, the first thing that it does is it disrupts the development of their brain. So we see a significant amount of children who have had adversities in their infancy, and this causes them to have speech and language delay by the time they are 12 to 15 months of age. Sometimes we now know if a pregnant mother has had significant adversities, such as exposure to domestic violence or intimate partner violence, or has pre-existing significant anxiety because of her own life experiences, the cortisol levels, the stress hormone in that mother, will cross the placenta into this developing baby, and these babies will be born already with evidence of disruptive neurodevelopment. This goes on to cause social, emotional, and cognitive problems. These are children that will be eligible typically for early intervention services in the school systems, an adoption of health risk behaviors. When they find that you are having difficulty in school, children who have learning disorders or emotional and behavioral disorders are at higher risk for dropping out of school. And as they approach the probability of dropping out of school at, say, 13 or 14 years of age, they begin to adopt health risk behaviors such as drinking, smoking, taking risky behaviors in general, joining gangs, being with other individuals. And this brings into all of the impact that we see associated with these kinds of symptoms that will cause cortisol levels to rise, and we will develop, these individuals will develop more diseases and disabilities, not just social problems such as being sent to juvenile detention or things of that nature, but actual diseases, high incidence of diabetes, high incidence of hypertension, higher incidence of cancer, and in essence, they will have an earlier death. Now, this particular study, as I said, started with the third tier, adverse childhood experiences. It was a little bit later that these two lower tiers were added, social conditions and generational embodiment and historical trauma. And so I'm going to talk a bit about that. So the adverse childhood experiences had 10 different questions. We can find that information out by just asking an individual 10 different questions. It's usually handed to a patient as a questionnaire, and they're just yes, no questions. Do you feel when you were growing up you had experienced physical abuse, emotional abuse, and or sexual abuse? And did you also feel when you were growing up that you were physically neglected, meaning that you didn't have enough food to eat, you were left alone as a young child, etc.? These are all dynamics that can, everybody, that can make a difference with respect to you're having toxic levels of cortisol. And emotional neglect. Emotional neglect is when a child is hurting and comes home from school, for example, and says, "Mommy, the teacher was not nice to me. And the mom says, "Shut up. I'm playing my video games." Or, "I don't want to hear about your problems. I have enough problems. We're not going to talk about that." And when that becomes the script in a household, these children become emotionally neglected. They have no one to turn to with respect to what's going on in their household. The other 5 dynamics are family dynamics specifically. If you have a parent who has mental illness, if you have a parent or a relative who has been incarcerated, if you have a mother who's a victim of intimate partner violence, if you have anyone in the household when you were growing up who had a substance use or misuse disorder, and or if there was presence of divorce. Divorce is probably one of the most common. I will use the term normal with quotation marks, because divorce has a very high frequency in our families, but it still is a stress factor for children who are growing up.
Just when my mom divorced, and when I was, I'd probably say 5 or 6 the last time, and he moved to a different state, got remarried, had more kids, and just never no contact really.
So after he and your mother got divorced, he never came back to see you?
No, I stayed with him 2 weeks when I was a senior in high school. Stayed with him 2 weeks, and...
But wait a minute. He left when you were 5.
Yeah.
And you didn't see him again till you were a senior in high school?
So I was a senior in high school. Yeah.
Did he find you, or did you find him?
No, I found him. I used to call him a lot, write him a lot, and he would never write back or call back or anything, but I was majorly the one trying to contact him.
So when you saw him years later, when you're a senior in high school, what happened? How did that
It was a good experience. It made me feel maybe we would be closer and have more contact, but it was a good experience. I really had a good time, and but never no contact after that. So, I tried, but still.
How much did you weigh then?
Then I weighed, it's really fascinating. I was weighing about 240, 245 or so, but that's funny. But during that time, that 2-week period of time, I remember coming back weighing around 210 or so. I lost probably
You lost
30
weight
pounds
during
during that period of time. Yeah.
What happened afterwards?
Oh, gained weight back.
You did.
Oh yeah. I probably by the end of my senior year, I was probably around 255.
So I want you to know that this particular individual was one of the original study population that helped us to understand adverse childhood experiences. And what I want you to understand is look at how it affected him when his parents got divorced and he was 5 and his father left and he didn't see him anymore. And even though he tried very hard to be in touch with his father, he could not. His father did not respond. And so when he finally found his father on his own as a senior in high school and went to see him, you heard what happened. And he had morbid obesity already by the time he found his father as a high school student. Obesity is one of the most common medical problems that we see when individuals have had adversities in childhood. And that has continued. He now, when you saw him, was not obese anymore. And that's because he was in a medical clinic that was sensitive to the fact that this man had had really significant adversity as a child, feeling really, in essence, discarded. So that original study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, was accepted around the United States. The CDC embraced that study, and everything was moving along in our country. But the problem was that first study was not culturally diverse. 94% of the people in that study were white. And so in 2014, another study was done called the Philadelphia Expanded ACE questions, because they felt that we needed to have more minority representation. The study population in the Philadelphia study was 42% Black. Well, that's more than we are in the country, but the purpose was to try to get more input from people of color. And they, in addition to asking the 10 questions associated with the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, we'll call that the ACE study, they asked 5 more questions. Did you ever witness violence growing up? How often or ever did you see someone being beaten up, stabbed, or shot in real life? Did you experience discrimination when you were growing up? How often did you feel that you were treated badly or unfairly because of your race? Did you have an adverse neighborhood experience? Did you feel you weren't safe? Did you feel people in your neighborhood looked out for each other and could be trusted? Were you bullied when you were growing up by peer or classmates, or did you ever live in foster care? So these are the 5 additional adversities that make up that second ACE. Remember that picture that I showed you of the tree with the roots. And so we have the tree, the branches are the adversities directly. The roots are the neighborhood and community that you live in. And we have all been there, haven't we, in churches where we've had church members and or families who have had families who have had a family member that have been a victim of crime and have been killed because they were a victim of crime, and how that affects us and especially children. A lot of us don't think about the impact that has, but that can cause permanent anxiety problems, permanent feelings of trauma, permanent levels of cortisol in our brain to stay reset at a higher level, which injures us in the long run. And then we don't want to forget our indigenous church members and those individuals that we come into contact who have indigenous roots. We have for a long time not ever talked about how many of us come from families where our great-grandparents were indigenous people. This is a very common occurrence in the African-American community. Many of us have, from a historical perspective, grandparents, great-grandparents who are indigenous people. And the issue of what has happened to indigenous people gets us to the issue of historical trauma. And then we need to be aware of what's happening right now because of COVID. In the last 2 years, COVID-19 virus fallout has shown that there are more severe child abuse injuries. We're having fewer numbers of reports of child abuse because there are fewer social workers available. And more importantly, we are having fewer numbers of reports of child abuse because the most common reporters of child abuse are teachers. And what has happened to us in the last 2 years, our children have been at home in virtual education. And it's very hard to be able to recognize child maltreatment, especially physical maltreatment, when the child is in front of a screen in front of you. You can still participate and see child neglect to some extent, but it's a lot harder. And we have had a significant downturn in the number of reports. So this shows that if you look at the green sign during COVID versus the dotted line before COVID, you can see how much higher the number of reports were per 1,000 children before COVID. The numbers of reports are significantly less since the COVID pandemic began. But what the research has also shown is that though those numbers are less, these children are more severely abused. The likelihood that these children will end up in the hospital is much greater than it will be, because it's like the tip of the iceberg. Think about the fact about history in the making. We, from a historical perspective, need to recognize how history makes a difference. And so we have history in the making right now with respect to that third category of adverse childhood experiences, environmental, not just the pandemic, but also what's going on in the environment. I think all of us are familiar with what has gone on with the lead pipes in Flint, Michigan, as compared to Detroit, Michigan. And how the water quality in Detroit was salvaged and people were not exposed to lead to any degree as compared to Flint, Michigan. What's different about Flint versus Detroit? The population of African-American people, dramatically higher. And Flint is still continuing to struggle tremendously with respect to the impact of lead toxicity for the children of Flint. This is environmental adversity, and it is extremely alive and well. What lead does to a child, first of all, is that it can cause a decrease in their IQ score, a high incidence of ADHD. It can cause hearing loss and damaged nerves, and it causes contributes to learning difficulties. It impairs the growth capability, and it interrupts the levels of vitamin D, which impairs the growth of these children, so they will be shorter. They develop abdominal pain and stomach cramping problems. They will develop lower sperm counts, which will mean that these children, these African-American children growing up in Flint, are less likely to be able to have children when they are grown. It causes impact upon the heart and causes high blood pressure at a younger age. It also causes anemia problems, iron deficiency anemia in particular. So these patients have chronic anemia, and it also causes kidney damage with kidney failure and slow growth of the bones in children. These are all environmental adversities that are here now. This is history in the making. And we as individuals in our country won't see this as historical trauma. This is ongoing trauma. And that's just Flint, Michigan. Let's also think about many of the locations in our country where contaminated water has been present for decades. I live in North Carolina, so do you, and I think about Camp Lejeune and the fact that this is those who were stationed at Camp Lejeune between 1953 and 1987 can presume that they have consumed contaminated water. And restitution for exposure to water contaminants is hard to come by. There are class action suits and civil suits, but all of this is kind of something that is more difficult. So let's talk now about all of these dynamics, these three types of adverse childhood experiences categories: the family categories, the community categories, and the environmental categories all come into play when we see children who are hurting in our Sunday school classes. What can we do for these children? Let's just be mindful, first of all, that we need to know who our students are and how they are. Many of us have classes where we don't know our students' families necessarily, and so they come every Sunday if they're able to come to class at this particular point post-pandemic or during the pandemic. And you may not know what's going on with them. You may not know that you have a little girl or a little boy in your class who is thinking about their baby sibling who was born with a congenital abnormality and is not even being raised by the family because of the congenital problems, is in a long-term care facility. You may not know that you have a child in your Sunday school class whose father is highly abusive. But you do know that this child is very compliant and follows your directions to the letter, and sometimes is there early and leaves late. because coming to Sunday school is a safe place for that child, and they're happy to be there. You may not know that there's a child in your Sunday school class who's in foster care from someone in your congregation. You may know that they're in foster care, but you may not know why they're in foster care. What I will tell you is that the majority of African-American children who are brought into foster care, the average age for entrance into foster care is 9. So they've had 9 years of child maltreatment, neglect, physical abuse, very often child sexual abuse, and finally, exposure to parents who may have substance use and misuse problems. When that is the case, you are their safe haven. You may not know all of these things. So it's a good idea as people who love God, trust in God, and ask always for discernment. It's a good idea for us to look at every child who comes into our classroom as a child who could potentially be a hurting child. Just like that man who was interviewed, that child may be a hurting child. And we want to first and foremost let them know that they are safe, always safe in our classroom. We want to let them know that they are loved and cared for. This is kind of hard sometimes because children who have had a lot of adversities can sometimes present as if they are ADHD, as if they are, it's just really hard for them to settle down. They may be very attention seeking in their behavior. They may have some problems that will make us want to be more disciplinary towards them. But let us remember something. And this is not something that when I was a younger pediatrician this was not even in our literature. It is now, but it wasn't when I did my residency and training and was first in pediatrics. What we did not know is that there will be children in our classrooms who have post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD because of what they have been exposed to. If you have a child who comes into your classroom and sits down and they've come from a violent home, and violence is very common, almost 45% of homes have some type of violence in that home. If you have a child coming into your Sunday school class from a violent home and they seem not to be paying attention, they seem to not have the self-confidence to be willing to read out loud, or you already know because you asked them to read something that they cannot read or they cannot read well. These are children who may very well have had that neuronal disruption that I spoke about as the first impact of having been exposed to adversity. And the adversity is usually in the home. So if you have a child like that who comes across as having ADHD or is attention seeking or is a poor reader or has a hard time staying focused on what you're talking about, don't assume that they are just a behavioral problem. Don't assume that. What I tell parents all the time and what I tell pediatric residents and others that I'm training, it's very hard to tell the difference between the distractibility of ADHD and the distractibility of post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. What we know about children who have PTSD is that we can give them Ritalin from now until. It is not going to make them be able to pay attention better because attention is not the problem. The problem of PTSD are invasive and intrusive thoughts that come into their mind, pictures of what happened last night when mama was getting beat up, pictures of what happened this week when they were exposed to something that made them really afraid, pictures of what may be happening to them every day that they are saved from when they come to the safe haven of your Sunday school class. And so keeping that in mind, let us first and foremost follow that scripture that says, judge not, that we not be judged, but instead let children know that they are safe. Some of the ways that you can let children know that they are safe is to sit near them if, in fact, they have trouble staying in their chair because, they may just have difficulties with that. Sit near them. And if you see that you have a child who can't read or is having trouble reading, don't out them to the rest of the classroom. Instead, say, can you see that picture right there? Tell us what's happening in that picture in your Sunday school lesson. That is such a wonderful way of giving that child the opportunity of being able to participate in the class and look at that picture and say, oh, Jesus is putting something down in a well, or there's a woman standing next to that thing. I think it's a well. And they can talk about the picture, because talking in pictures for children who have learning disabilities, or children who have anxiety, or children who have PTSD, and for children who have ADHD, talking in pictures is the best way you can allow them to participate in the class, and everybody will be just as impressed by what they have to say. Let children know they are secure. They are secure in your class. No one can walk in that door and do harm to them. We try to make sure that when parents drop children off in a Sunday school class, we know that who that parent is, and that they're the person who's supposed to come back and get that child when Sunday school is over, if it's going to be that way. Knowing that there is a safe haven for children for at least an hour in a week of their life is very good. School is a safe haven very often for children if they have had a lot of adversities in their home, or if they're still having adversities in their home. We have an opportunity to be the nurturing dynamic for these children. That's number 3. Let them find a nurturing environment as we minister to their spirit. And if they are kind of, I call them popcorn children, they can't stay in their seat, they just pop up all the time. Or if they're attention seeking in their behavior, you see that they're trying to get the attention of the other children, to bring the attention to them by their behavior, many times to distract everybody from what may be hard for them. And so their coping mechanism is to let me throw spitballs, or let me throw my pencil across the table so that they don't ask me to read. That's, if you see children like that, let us be nurturing to them and be very, speak well of them to other children, because it's really common for the compliant children in a Sunday school class to verbally and overtly say, oh, you mess up all the time. Or why don't you be quiet? Why don't you sit in your seat? They become the mini teachers. We don't want to let the children take on that role. What we want to say is, thank you, Sally, but I'm the teacher, and I want to let Johnny help us understand this particular thing better. Can everybody else be quiet? And Johnny, hey, how about if you let us know about this? And don't make it be something that he has to read if you already know he can't read well. Give him an opportunity. The term we use often is catching them in being good, so that they can, in fact, say what they want to say and demonstrate themselves. And the 4th point about what can we do for hurting children is to let our lessons be relevant to where children may be. This is hard for us, especially for those of us who are older teachers, because a lot of our children's points of reference are not the Bible, and they're not their Sunday school lesson. They're the most recent video game. And sometimes, when children start using that as their point of reference, and we're in Sunday school, if we're traditionalists, we're going to want to say, yes, but we're talking about the book of John and verse this and that. I get that. But, we need to catch children where they are. And if they talk about their favorite video game, where, oh, by the way, if you're not gamers, you need to understand that many video games are pretty antisocial in their messages. They promote solving problems with violence. They promote the concept that it's not that you would win because you are good. In fact, in video games, the player, our children, are usually the good people, and the game is the bad component. And the player, our children, are fighting against the bad component, and many times they lose. That's the thing that happens about video games. And the challenge for us is that video games that are like that, the kinds of games that are pretty violent, and where children are trying to beat the bad component of the video game, what does that teach them? What it teaches them is that the people who win most of the time, or the entity that wins most of the time, is the one who has the power, not necessarily the one who is right and Christian and concerned and trying to help other people. No, that's not who usually is the winner or the strong and powerful one when we have children who are playing video games. So therefore, you can see how video games strongly promotes the role of being a bully. And many parents don't recognize that when they allow children to play games that are not even approved for children in their age range. Many of our parents, in an effort to be involved parents, will invite children who are young to play the same video game that they're playing, even though the video game that they're playing is already rated not to be appropriate for children as young as the parent is bringing them in. A lot of my 5, 6, 7-year-olds are were playing Call of Duty when that was the most common one, or Fortnite when that was the most common one, none of which are approved for children that young. So in the manner that we want to be able to make sure that we as Sunday school teachers are concerned is that we need to catch children where they are. We need to recognize how relevant it is and how important it is for us to make sure that they recognize, as Jesus said in his scripture, that they are the light of our lives, and they are the most important thing in our lives, because we are only in their lives for a moment. We are the bow and they are the arrows. And I beg and plead with many of the teachers who are here and those of you who are listening to recognize that raising up a child in the way that they should go is very important, but we should never step on them in the process of raising them up. I want to open the floor for some discourse, if at all possible, and it might be in the form of chat if you all can or cannot. But let's see, we should not be muted. So I want to give you my contact information in case you have any questions or comments or concerns that might be relevant. But I hope that you can understand now that the most important piece that can injure our children forever are the adversities in life. And if there isn't anything else that you get out of this particular presentation, that is to know that when we experience adversities, our stress hormone rises. And if we experience too many adversities in our life, especially in our childhood, our stress hormone not only rises, but it's like a thermostat that gets reset. It's no longer going to come back down to the ambient temperature of the room. It's going to stay at a higher level. And that those elevated levels of cortisol, as they stay in our system for the rest of our lives, will cause us to have ongoing health problems and ongoing problems with coping, not the least of which is overeating. Okay, now let's see. Let me stop sharing my screen. If you've had a moment to write down my contact information, should you have additional comments. And let me give us a few minutes for some discourse. I'm eager to be able to interact with whomever may have a question or comment in this situation. So please do unmute yourselves, and I'm happy to have interaction in any way that you would desire.
Hi, can you please give us your contact information one more time, please?
Sure. I'm looking back to that screen. Let's see. It is.
Or maybe just put it in the chat so everybody would have it.
Sure. Okay, I can do that. Let me just put it in here. I will put it in the chat room. Go to everyone. There you go. Sharon _Cooper at med.unc.edu is my contact information for anyone or everyone, who is here. And please do feel free to ask any questions or make any comments.
Hi, my name is Sheena Parker, and I am actually a special education teacher. So I teach K-2 students on the autism spectrum. And our entire school building this year was blessed enough to take trauma-informed schools training. And we went through the ACEs surveys, and, you know, we learned a lot about recognizing trauma, not only in children, but in ourselves, and how it affects us as mentors and educators and everything else. So just to hear all of this from a church perspective has been amazing, because I had literally asked myself, told myself we could take those same principles and apply it to the children that we work with in the church. But in the church, we have that additional piece, that spiritual guidance and leadership piece that we may not be able to provide as openly to our students in school. So in addition to giving them the mental health and the strategies and interventions, we're also able to instill that hope in them, that in spite of, God tells us that we are able to overcome. And despite what we are, when our mother and father forsake us, then the Lord will take us up. So although they're experiencing these traumas and things at home and in their community, you're right, that church, that classroom, it becomes that safe haven for that student. And just like that age-old saying goes, students don't care about how much you know until they know how much you care. So as spiritual leaders, that is so important for us to first build that community of safety, nurture, and support. And that's how we gain their trust. And, you know, a lot of times that's how some of these situations of trauma are divulged, by having that trusting relationship with another, you know, adult. So this has been so valuable and so amazing for me. So I really, really enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for those comments. And, you know, the CDC tells us, the Center for Disease Control and Injury Prevention tells us that all a child needs is at least one nurturing and safe adult in their life. If they can just have one that they can count on, that they can speak to, that they can not be judged negatively, by whom they will not be judged negatively, that bolsters our children to believe in themselves. And to also, that person, just like a teacher, is the person who can help that child see their worth. You know, the child may be learning disabled and can't read, but they may be an excellent artist, in which case, you know, we would say, okay, let's all draw pictures, give everybody an opportunity, but you already know that that child is going to have the opportunity to be the best. And that's just it. This is something that we have to look for, not just assume everybody is the same. And so thank you so much, Ms. Parker. I really appreciate your comments. And coming from a teacher, my hat is off to you, because I teach interns and residents and doctors. I teach the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. But when I tried to teach a kindergarten class one time, maybe twice, I thought, what? They're popcorn. Nobody stays in their seat for long enough. I was like, okay, I'll just rather see them one at a time in my clinic, not in a classroom. So thank you so much. I appreciate that. Other comments and things that you would like to share with the group? Ms. Johnson, yes.
Yes. You mentioned a statistic that I wanted to clarify. You said 45% of homes are violent. That seemed kind of high. Do you mean a certain kind of home, or
no?
All homes, or
what the literature says is that 45% of children can be in when you have domestic violence. This is the question. This is the answer. I'm sorry, I might not have been clear. If there's domestic violence in a home, 45% of the time, children will also be involved. They will either be, you know, if you have an individual in a home who is a violent person, it isn't always directed only towards a spouse. Many times it's also directed towards the children. And thank you very much for asking for that clarification. So that's why, you know, it hasn't been that long that DSS allowed us to make reports about domestic violence. It used to be that we could only talk about child maltreatment specifically. This is a child's been physically abused or neglected or whatever. But now it is a mandatory report. If we have children who have been exposed to intimate partner violence, that is a mandatory report to DSS because of that 45%. You know, that's almost 1 out of 2 children are going to also be victims of that. But it's not just that the child will be physically abused in that home. Children are profoundly psychologically impacted when they see someone that they love who is being abused, and profoundly so. And so that's the other reason that it is a mandatory report around the country, not just in North Carolina. Thank you for that point of clarification. No question. Ms. Little? I'm sorry.
Yes, Dr. Cooper, Yes, my name is Barbara Little. And first of all, this has been a wonderful session, and I took it for two reasons. One, I just recently been asked by my church to be a Sunday school teacher. And two, I have a personal situation where my husband and I have basically have had to take the care of two toddlers. Their mother has bipolar,
Yes, yes, right.
problems, and then my son, who is their father, a single parent, needed some help with them, and he works long hours, and we have to basically keep them all week. So I needed to get this information for those two reasons. But this has been a wonderful session. I've learned a lot, and you also put a smile on my face. But I don't know if you remember me or not. But we were members of the National Council of Black Women. And you and I rode together overnight to Washington, D.C., whereby you were the keynote speaker regarding the effects of radon gases coming from the soil. Yes, and I was a clinic administrator for Cape Fear Valley Medical Center. So when I saw you, I'm going, I know who she is. But it's so wonderful to see you again, and to see that you're still in this line of work of forensics and with children. But it's been wonderful seeing you and getting the information from your session. It's been a wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, and please do unmute yourself, Orlando or Patricia. I can't see your last name. I apologize. Please do speak.
I'd like to thank you also for sharing, and I appreciate the comments that have been made by others as well. But oftentimes when we look at ministering to hurting children, you have to take a look at who the person is that's doing the ministry. And I think we've got a lot of hurting adults.
Yes, yes.
Who are oftentimes in the roles of trying to help children.
Yes.
And I think we might need to take a look at being able to support those hurting adults, because it kind of impacts in a very real way how successful or how effective you can be when it comes to ministering to children. So any thoughts on
yes,
hurting adults and how we can help support people who want to help children, but who have some deficiencies on their own?
Yes, thank you for that. And that's very, very true. You know, there are some Sunday school teachers that you can tell right away are almost harsh disciplinarians, almost. And usually when that's the case, they've had that kind of treatment as they were growing up, and they see that as this is how I can't turned out okay. And so this is how it should be. So I think that when things like that happen, I will, first of all, I engage them off, you know, when the children are not present, to say, man, you know, it's been, sometimes you can have, I don't try to get personal with them per se. Hey, I can tell something happened to you, but I don't do it that way. But I would usually say, it's hard sometimes when we're with the children, isn't it? Because they are not always obedient like we would like for them to be, as an icebreaker for that person. And often they'll say, yeah, my mom and dad would never let this happen. Or, you know, I was raised by whomever, my grandmother, because, you know, my parents were not worthwhile, or whatever. They will give you a history perhaps of the adversities that they've experienced. And so we don't want to judge them. We just want to be a buffer in situations like that, because thank God they're there and willing to work in the Sunday school ministry. And if we have a particular child that seems to be a trigger for that person, then I often will say, oh yeah, you know, Johnny's going to be coming in today. So I tell you what, I'm going to sit next to him and try to make sure he doesn't interrupt you, you know, while you're teaching the lesson this time. And you just let me know anything that I can do, since you're the lead teacher today. I'm really glad to be able to do that. So, and, you know, I'll jump up and run around and help some other child read because they can't read, you know, so that they don't become embarrassed about the fact that they don't read. And that person can be the one in charge for that particular Sunday, and the children will not be afraid of them. That's a very good point. Thank you very much for that particular question and resource.
Thank you for your responses.
No problem. No problem. Any other questions or comments?
Yes, I'm Linda Bryan here, and I was so impressed. This was just a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. And I want to ask you, first of all, are you available to speak to a church or a group you know, on your, apart from the General Baptist Convention or independently, if we call you and want to have a workshop in the church, are you available? Okay.
Yes, before I
Okay.
would have had to have said no, but I'm getting ready to retire from my clinical everyday work. So I'll have a little bit more time. I have other things that I do, but I'm
sure
always,
you're very busy.
but
Yes,
it's an
but
honor.
thank you.
It's
Thank you
always
so
an honor
much.
to talk to people who want to do the right thing. That's for sure.
Thank you so much. One of the interests that we have is looking at young women who are transitioning out of foster care into independent living. And
Yes,
so that's the reason that I participated in this workshop, because I'm looking at, you know, they come from various backgrounds and they're
yes,
just various situations.
right.
And so I am thankful for the points that you made about
Yes.
these three areas
Right.
of
The child
impact.
experiences, the community experiences, and the
Yes, and
environment.
the
Yes,
environmental experiences.
right.
So thank you for that. The other piece that I was interested in, that what you said, was that women who are pregnant, how their mental health and their emotional health, how that can
Crosses the
impact and
placenta.
transition
Oh,
into the fetus,
right.
and the child is born in this way. I wonder how, you know, it would be great to have maybe a conference with women who are expecting. I mean, I don't think
Yes, and are thinking about
the
getting pregnant.
impact.
Right. They don't know. They don't know. This research just came out in 2018. And now we have so much more. We have so much more information that and in my transition from seeing patients regularly, have started a foundation specifically on this topic. And the name of the foundation is the Mace Foundation, MACE, which stands for Maternal Adverse Childhood Experience, because we need to really be focused. So if you just go online and just type in the Mace Foundation, you know, our website will come up. But the point is that this is all my life as a doctor, I call myself Paula Revere. I've been ringing bells a lot to a lot of people. And this is the new bell that I'm ringing about pregnancy and preconception. And that if we have a highly stressed pregnant woman, that is going to cause more problems for that baby before that baby's ever even born. And then, you know, if we aren't aware of it, then that first year of life, we're not going to spend more time. We're not going to take the time to try to rewire that brain by lots of maternal nurturing, by lots of, you know, we've got to do a lot to kind of rewire that brain, because the brain is very plastic and it can get better. But we have to help that parent know what to do to help that brain get better. So I'm 100% on board with what you're saying. Thank you for that.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate your presentation.
Thank you. I appreciate that as well. Any other comments? I hope they don't get mad at us for still being on.
Just a clarification. You said the MAZE, is that spelled M-A-Z-E Foundation?
M-A-C-E. So ACE, you know, the ACE, Adverse Childhood Experience, is the ACE of it. And M is focused on mothers, maternal adverse childhood experiences. The Mace Foundation is all one word, the Mace Foundation. And particularly, and you all are already aware of the fact that African-American women have the highest death rate in pregnancy, 242% more likely to die in pregnancy than white women. And these are women with college educations. It's not about the level of education. It's about the toxic stress that is not just family stresses, it's historical and generational stress as well that I had talked about for African-American women. So if you remember Serena Williams talking about how she couldn't believe that she almost died after she had her baby, she said, if I could get that sick and I had the best medical care you could possibly imagine the women who don't have those kinds of resources. And so this is another reason why I felt it was really important for us to start reaching out to women who are considering having a baby and women who are pregnant, to let them know. And the key things that we would want to do, because we don't like to give medicines a lot to pregnant women, you know, we would like not to have to do that. So the 4 things that we recommend is mindfulness, which is like walking in the woods and deep breathing fresh air and getting away from the stresses that might be at home. Mindfulness, we also would want meditation, and we all have that opportunity. Just take our Bibles or do yoga, meditation every day. And then the other one is wellness, so that we don't eat more and more because we are stressed, but following wellness behaviors, trying very hard to step away from the two most problematic things in obesity, sugar and salt, trying to step away from that. Those two things are the things that make us gain weight. And then finally, our goal is to be resilient, not to give up, not to feel like I can't do anything about what's happening to me in my life right now. I have this child, or I'm going to have this child. This is just it. Nope. Be resilient. We want to help them by using those 2-3 other steps that will help build resilience for our mothers. So that can be another workshop, and we'll have to talk about that sometime in the near future. I so appreciate your presence and your attention. I just want to make sure if there's any other comment, I just wanted to give anyone an opportunity if there was anything else you wanted to ask or say. Well, as they say in church, I guess that is time for us to cease and desist. But thank you all so much for your attention, and please have a good day. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm very glad. I promise you I will respond. Okay. Thank you all. Take care. Bye.